What's up everybody, my name is Phosphoros and today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Sunfury Arcane in the War Within patch 11.0. Specifically, this guide is going to cover all the changes made after the September 3rd hotfix that removed Burden of Power double dipping, and also the September 7th APL optimizations that made a couple changes to the rotation. So with all that said, let's get right into it. Alright, so before we head into the talents section, I want to cover a couple different terms that I'll be using throughout the video, and it's pretty important for you to learn what they mean as well. So the first one is Spellqueuing. Spellqueuing is the act of immediately casting one spell as soon as the previous spell finishes. So an example of this is Arcane Blast. As you can see, I'm going to be casting Arcane Blast here, and if I wait until the cast actually succeeds before I click the next one, there's small little breaks in between the casts, and that's not very efficient. However, if I perform Spellqueuing, which is just another way to say spam click Arcane Blast when the current cast is about to finish, then as you can see, I'm spam clicking. Very minimal to no breaks in between the casts. So this is what you want to be doing pretty much all the time. And it's very easy to perform. You could try it yourself. And it's important to know what Spellqueuing means in order to learn our next term, double dipping. So I just explained what it means to spellqueue two casted spells together. However, what happens if you spellqueue a casted spell and an instant cast spell together? Well, a lot of the times the instant cast spell will benefit from whatever buffs were present when the casted spell ended. So what does that mean in the context of Arcane? Well, we have a buff called Nether Precision, which reads, consuming clearcasting increases the damage of your next two Arcane Blasts or Arcane Barrages by 20%. However, if we spellqueue Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage together, Nether Precision will buff the damage of your next Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage by 20%. So let's see what this looks like in game. I'll generate a clearcasting to get Nether Precision. And by the way, this only works on the final stack of Nether Precision. So I'll consume the clearcasting to get Nether Precision. I now have the final stack. If I spellqueue Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage together, both spells benefit from Nether Precision, but it's important that you spellqueue them together on that final stack. And the final term is clipping. So clipping is the act of canceling any channeled spell with a different spell. So in the context of Arcane, that would mean canceling or clipping Arcane Missiles with any other spell like Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I'll first generate a clearcasting. Here, so I'm going to cast this Arcane Missiles, and then as soon as the greater cooldown ends, I'm going to clip this Missiles with a different spell. So cast Arcane Missiles, clipped with Arcane Blast. Okay, and all you have to do is just spam click the next cast you want to use, and it'll immediately clip it for you. So let's do that one more time. Generate a clearcasting. Alright, here we go. I'm going to cast this Arcane Missiles, and then start spam clipping my Arcane Barrage to clip Arcane Missiles with Arcane Barrage. Here we go. Clipped with Arcane Barrage. So if you have any questions, let me know down below. And I'll let you know when you do or do not want to clip later on. But whenever I refer to clipping, that's what I mean. Alright, so this is the pure single target build for Sunfury Arcane. So taking a look at the Arcane tree first, let's cover some of the talents that you definitely want to be tracking. The first of which is Nether Precision. This is the main damage buff that all Arcane hero talents play around, and you definitely want to be tracking this. Next up, you want to be tracking clearcasting, as that is the main way for us to generate Nether Precision stacks. And you also want to be tracking Aether Attunement. This is a buff that you gain every 3 times you consume clearcasting, which will cause your next Arcane Missiles to deal 100% increased damage, as well as cleave onto nearby targets. So we do play around this talent, so you definitely want to be tracking it. Outside of those 3, you want to be tracking our 3 major cooldowns, which are Evocation, Touch of the Magi, and Arcane Surge. So everything else on this tree is pretty much just a passive damage increase that you don't really play around. So now let's cover the Sunfury talents. So Sunfury has a couple different talents that we want to be tracking, the first of which is Spellfire Spheres. So Spellfire Spheres is a buff that you gain anytime you cast Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage, and it'll stack up to 6 times. Once it reaches 6 stacks, it'll turn into another buff called Burden of Power. Burden of Power will cause your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage to deal 30% increased damage, and whenever you consume Burden of Power, you'll gain another buff called Glorious Incandescence. This will cause your next Arcane Barrage to grant 4 arcane charges and call down a storm of 4 meteorites on its target. So let's take a look at what all of this looks like in-game. Alright, so down here is my Spellfire Spheres tracker, and as you can see, if I cast an Arcane Blast, it'll increment by 1. Same thing if I cast Arcane Barrage, it'll also increment by 1. Now, if I build this up to 6 stacks, it will turn into Burden of Power. So there's a couple different ways to consume Burden of Power, first of which is to just cast Arcane Blast, and if I do so, I'll now generate Glorious Incandescence. So my next Arcane Barrage will refund 4 arcane charges and also call down a storm of meteorites. Here they come. Okay? Now, the second way to consume Burden of Power is with an Arcane Barrage. So we'll do that now. If I consume Burden of Power with an Arcane Barrage will get the 30% damage increase from Burden of Power, and it'll also immediately consume Glorious Incandescence. So let's see what that looks like. Barrage. That was damage buffed, and now here comes Glorious Incandescence. So those are the 2 ways to consume Burden of Power, but you can also Spellqueue Blast and Barrage with Burden of Power. Now, Burden of Power will not benefit from double dipping the same way Nether Precision does. Burden of Power will only buff 1 of your 2 spells, even if you double dip. So let's see what that looks like. I have Burden of Power. If I Spellqueue Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage together, Arcane Blast will get the 30% damage buff, Arcane Barrage will not, but Arcane Barrage will consume Glorious Incandescence immediately. So here we go. There's the 4 meteorites. So if you have any questions about any of that, let me know down below, but that is how we consume Burden of Power, and we'll talk more about that in the rotation section moving forward. Okay, so the only other things you need to know about the Sunfury tree is that we have a passive called Arcane Soul. This passive will appear whenever Arcane Surge expires, and for the duration of Arcane Soul, your Arcane Barrage will guaranteed grant you 1 clear casting stack and generate 4 arcane charges. So during the Arcane Soul window, we will have a different priority list, and we'll talk more about that in the rotation section. Outside of Arcane Soul, you also have this choice node here. In pure single target, you'll be using Savor the Moment. In Cleave or Mythic Plus, you'll be using Sunfury Execution. So that's all you need to know about the Sunfury tree. Let's cover the rest of the 2 builds for Sunfury Arcane. Alright, so let's swap over to the Raid Cleave build from the single target build. You can already see some of the changes that we'll be making. First up, we're going to be taking a point out of Consortium's Bauble in order to get Arcane Cleave instead. This will just let our Arcane Barrage cleave onto nearby targets, which is perfect for AoE. We're also going to be taking 2 points out of Prodigious Savant in order to put them in Ore Barrage and High Voltage. Both of these will just serve to increase our charge generation in AoE scenarios. Of course, like I mentioned before, we'll be taking out Savor the Moment in favor of Sunfury Execution, just so we get that extra bit of execute damage in AoE. Outside of that, the general tree is pretty much the same. Looking at the Mythic Plus build though, Arcane and Sunfury trees are both the same, but we pick up a couple different utility options that better serve us in Mythic Plus rather than Raid. So those are the 3 talent builds that you'll be using for Arcane, and you can mix and match any of these general tree talents to your liking based on if you want more defensives, more utility, whatever you want. This is pretty flexible, rather than the Arcane and Sunfury tree are pretty set in stone for what we'll be taking in terms of damage. Alright, so let's talk about the general playstyle for Arcane, and then we'll cover the single target filler rotation. So Arcane has a very ebb and flow style to its damage pattern. About every minute and a half, you'll have a big burn with Arcane Surge and all your cooldowns like Evocation, Arcane Surge, and Touch the Magi, followed by a period of low filler damage, into a mini burn with only Touch of the Magi, followed by another period of low filler damage, and then the cycle repeats. So the playstyle for Arcane, specifically Sunfury, is that Sunfury Arcane loves staying at 4 arcane charges because it lowers Arcane Blast's cast time, which leads to more Burden of Power procs, and as such, you're only incentivized to Barrage when it will not dump your charges. So I'm going to be covering the single target filler rotation first, because the 2 burn rotations actually use the filler rotation as part of their rotation, so it just makes sense to cover the filler rotation first. So let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to cover this from bottom to top rather than top to bottom, because as you can see, it's very top heavy. So let's keep it simple first and just cover the base case. So base case, you have no nether precision, no clear casting, so you're just going to cast a regular arcane blast to fish for clear casting procs, which will then allow you to cast arcane missiles. Now, some of these clear casting procs will be buffed by Aether Attunement, in which case you will not clip the cast. So you only clip the arcane missiles cast if it's not buffed by Aether Attunement. Okay? Now, when you cast clear casting with arcane missiles, you're going to generate nether precision. With nether precision, you're going to cast buffed arcane blasts. So this is the general flow of the rotation at its very simplest. Arcane blast for clear casting, arcane missiles for nether precision, blast with nether precision. Now if you ever run out of mana, you're going to cast Arcane Barrage, and that is arcane at its dumbest downed form. Eventually though, with enough arcane blast casts, you're going to have Burden of Power proc, and in that case, you are going to consider Arcane Barraging. Now, it's not only Burden of Power that will cause us to Arcane Barrage. We're going to have another couple buffs that will allow us to do that, but we'll cover that now. So, oh, by the way, we have Arcane Orb up here. So if you ever do Barrage and run out of mana, you will then Arcane Orb to regenerate your charges. So this only ever really happens when you run out of mana, you have to Barrage. Outside of that, you're never going to really be using Arcane Orb, but it's there. If you do have less than 2 Arcane charges, you will Arcane Orb. Alright, now let's get into Arcane Barrage. So, you are going to Arcane Barrage if you have 4 Arcane charges, and any of the following conditions are true. So let's take this one by one. Condition A. You have 1 stack of nether precision, you're casting Arcane Blast, and have any of the following: Burden of Power, Glorious Incandescence, or Intuition. Now, these 3 buffs can be dumbed down into some way to regenerate your arcane charges. Okay? So let's read it again. Arcane Barrage with 4 arcane charges, 1 stack of nether precision, you're casting Arcane Blast, in which case you are Spellqueuing, right? You're Spellqueuing Arcane Blast with Arcane Barrage at 1 stack of nether precision, and you have some way to regenerate your arcane charges. So, those ways are a Burden of Power proc, Glorious Incandescence, which is of course tied into Burden of Power, and if you Spellqueue Blast and Barrage, you're automatically going to consume Glorious Incandescence, so these 2 are kind of one and the same. Or Intuition, which is our tier set bonus, and this is pretty much the same passive effect as Glorious Incandescence, where whenever you Arcane Barrage, you'll get your 4 arcane charges back. So these all are pretty much just another way to say you will Barrage and get your charges back, refunded. Alright? So that is case number 1. If you are at 4 arcane charges, you're casting Arcane Blast, you're intending to Spellqueue with nether precision, you will Barrage if you have some way to regenerate your charges. Condition B. If you have 4 arcane charges, you have no nether precision stacks and no clear casting stacks, and this can also be translated into no way to generate nether precision, but you do have some way to generate your arcane charges, then you will Barrage. So, if you have 4 arcane charges, no nether precision, no way to generate nether precision, but you do have an arcane charge refund, then you will Barrage. And the final case, if you have 4 arcane charges, any amount of nether precision, you're not casting Arcane Blast, and you do have Burden of Power, then you can just Barrage. So what this means is you're not Spellqueuing because you're not casting Arcane Blast. You are coming off a different spell like Arcane Missiles, for example. So that's pretty much when you'll see this happen, is you have Burden of Power, you cast Arcane Missiles, so you gain nether precision. Since you're not casting Arcane Blast, you can just immediately Barrage right out of the gate from that Missiles. You do not have to cast Arcane Blast first. And that also is the same thing for this one. If you have no nether precision, no clear casting stacks, but do have any of the following, you do not specifically have to be Spellqueuing Blast to Barrage here. In the first case you do. In the second case you do not. You can just cast Arcane Barrage if you're not Spellqueuing Arcane Blast first. So I hope all that made sense. I know it sounds like a lot, but if you actually try this in game, it's a little bit more intuitive than it sounds. And I will be showing you guys a 3-minute demo to hopefully help you out in understanding this. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions, and let's get into the demo. Well, before we head into the demo, it would probably be a smart idea for me to cover the single target burns first. So let's do that now. Surge burn. Very scripted. Cast Evocation. Once Evocation's finished channeling, you cast Arcane Missiles. Then you're going to clip this Arcane Missiles cast with an Arcane Surge. And if you have 4 Arcane Charges, you're going to Arcane Barrage. Now, in the very first Surge burn of any given pull, you will not have 4 Arcane Charges because we don't have High Voltage. We're using a single target build, so of course the only Arcane Charge you'll have is 1 from Evocation. So in the very first opening burn, you will skip this line and just touch the Magi immediately after Arcane Surge. In every burn after the first, though, you should already have 4 Arcane Charges, so you can Barrage into touch. And then either way, you enter the filler rotation. So now you stay in the filler rotation until Arcane Surge expires, and once it does, you will then be entering the Arcane Soul window. So the goal with every time you enter Arcane Soul is to end Arcane Soul with 3 stacks of clear casting. So here's the priority list. First order of business is Barrage to 3 stacks of clear casting. After you reach 3 stacks, you need to kind of gauge how much time left you have inside of Arcane Soul. If you can Missiles and Barrage, then you do so. But if you will not be able to fit the Arcane Barrage after Arcane Missiles, then you skip the Arcane Missiles and you just Barrage on the final global cooldown, because we want to end Arcane Soul with 3 stacks of clear casting. So anytime you cast Arcane Missiles during Arcane Soul, you're now back at 2 stacks. So you want to make sure you can always fit a final Arcane Barrage to end at 3. Alright, if you have any questions about that, let me know down below in the comments. But after the Arcane Soul window, you cast Shifting Power, and that's the end of the Arcane Surge burn. Now from here, you just follow the filler rotation until Touch of the Magi's back off cooldown, and then you're ready to enter the mini burn. So mini burn is pretty simple. Cast Arcane Barrage into Touch of the Magi, and then you enter the filler rotation. Do this until Evocation, Arcane Surge, and Touch of the Magi are back off cooldown, and then the rotation effectively resets back to the Arcane Surge burn stage. Now let's head into the 3-minute demo. Alright, so here's a 3-minute demo of me performing the single target rotation on a training dummy. I'm trying out a different style this time where I'll have the entire priority list up on the side and I'll be highlighting the conditions I'm fulfilling so you can follow along. Let me know down below if this style was helpful and if you'd want to see it going forward, and of course, ask any questions you have. I'm very active in the comments. So that covers the single target rotation. Now let's head into the AoE portion of the guide. You want to begin using the AoE rotation whenever you reach 5 targets, and you can also start at 3 to 4 during execute. So, first up, cast Arcane Blast once during touch of the Magi for Magi Spark, and keep in mind, this kind of will just happen automatically if you follow the rotation as listed, but it is still mentioned here because it is important. Next up, cast Arcane Barrage if you have 4 Arcane charges and any of the following conditions are true. Now you'll notice these conditions are very similar to how they were in the single target rotation. The only difference, in fact, is that Arcane Orb or Clear Casting will give you another opportunity to cast Arcane Barrage when you're spellqueuing with Nether Precision and Arcane Blast. So the reason these two work is because in AoE, an Arcane Orb cast will guaranteed give you all your charges back with this target count. And also Clear Casting works because you'll have High Voltage talented in the AoE builds, so that's why these two are added onto these three as some way to just regenerate your Arcane charges. Condition B, you have no Nether Precision and no Clear Casting stacks, but you do have any of the following, some way to regenerate Arcane charges. Or Condition C, you have any amount of Nether Precision, you're not casting Arcane Blast, but you do have Burden of Power, in which case you just Arcane Barrage. Next up, you're going to Arcane Barrage if you have any amounts of Arcane charges, and you're about to cast Arcane Missiles with Aether Attunement. So the reason this line works is because we have High Voltage talented, so an Aether Attunement buffed Arcane Missiles is practically guaranteed to give us all of our Arcane charges back. Therefore, we want to dump our Arcane charges first before we cast Arcane Missiles with Aether Attunement. So you may get Orb Barrage procs, don't even worry about it, just Arcane Barrage until you run out of all your Arcane charges. Then cast Arcane Missiles with Aether Attunement, and that fulfills that line, and of course then when you cast out Arcane Missiles, you'll be in line number 4, which is Arcane Missiles with Clear Casting for Nether Precision, or Arcane Charges. And you're going to clip this cast unless it's Aether Attunement buffed. Next up, you're going to cast Arcane Orb if you have less than 2 Arcane Charges. After that, you will you would Arcane Blast with Nether Precision, Arcane Explosion at exactly 0 Arcane Charges, regular Arcane Blasts, and Arcane Barrage if you run out of mana. So that covers the filler rotation. Now let's head into the AoE Burns. Alright, so here are the AoE Burns, and as you can see, everything is exactly the same as the single target rotation. The only difference is you'll be casting Arcane Orb after Arcane Missiles if you need the Arcane charges. So it'll be Evocation, Arcane Missiles, clip with the Arcane Orb if you need the charges, Surge, Barrage, Touch, enter the filler rotation, everything else is exactly the same. So with that said, let's take a look at how all this looks put together in the AoE demo. So here's the AoE rotation performed on a group of training dummies. Once again, I'll have the priority list up on the screen and highlighted based on which condition I'm currently fulfilling so you can follow along. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I know this wasn't the same style of guide that I usually do, but I wouldn't be able to get these updates out quick enough if I was spending too much time on one particular video, so I tried some new things out. Let me know your thoughts down below, and as always, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, I appreciate the support, and I wish you a very nice day. Take care.